This hearing to order. The Subcommittee on House Armed Services Readiness Subcommittee. As I review the subcommittee's work over the last several years in preparation for this hearing, one central theme jumped out at me. The military departments have struggled in every area to achieve the right balance between investments in new platforms and construction or procurement of those new platforms and sustainment of its existing inventory. While procurement of systems is within the jurisdiction of other House Armed Service subcommittees, once the aircraft, ships, ground vehicles, and every other thing has been purchased, the Readiness Subcommittee is responsible for overseeing the decades of maintenance and training so that the service members are ready for combat. The accounts which sustain and maintain these systems are chronically underfunded, and the infrastructure that facilitates that sustainment, our shipyards, our depots, our bases, are often crumbling or woefully out of date. This focus on readiness has taken new importance given world events. Russia's immoral invasion of Ukraine has illustrated to the world anew that military success is built on a foundation of sound sustainment and logistics in a contested environment. This failure to balance the appetite for new with the requirement to sustain what the department already has applies as much to barracks as it does to ships and tanks. We have been repeatedly told by witnesses at hearings that military personnel are the department's #1 asset. However, when there are hard choices to be made, the sustainment of barracks, dorms, and child development centers, the places where children must go when the men and women are called to duty, are often first on the chopping block. Unfortunately, we here in Congress, all the members of this committee and others, share some of the blame for this ongoing phenomena. To steal a quote from one of our witnesses today, General Martin, O&M funds do not have a zip code and therefore are not particularly relevant to what's home to all of us. As a result, the O&M funds are too often an attractive target to offset all manner of other priorities. In addition, it can be difficult to understand the true impact of the cuts in these accounts on service members and on readiness. I look forward today to this hearing from our witnesses on a number of topics, not only about updates on the many topics within the subcommittee's purview, but also on the real-world impacts of not fully funding operation and maintenance accounts. We have a lot to cover, so I will put my further thoughts and remarks aside and turn to Ranking Member Waltz of Florida for his remarks.
Hey, thank you, Chairman Garamendi, and I too want to especially thank all of you. Thank our witnesses. I appreciate that this hearing's a little bit out of sequence. But I do appreciate your patience and willingness to be here. And obviously, typically during this hearing, we would be poring over the budget to inform your work on this year's, to form our work on this year's NDAA. Obviously, as you know, we've completed that business last week, at least in the House. Nonetheless, I do believe that today's readiness update is important. It's vitally important. We need it to inform our continued oversight. And the wonderful thing about the NDAA is once we've completed our business, we're already starting on the next one. And it does provide an opportunity for you all to start informing that work. And particularly, I think we have so much experience right now in our vice chiefs, and we look forward to absorbing that. That said, I, for one, am frustrated, as I think you just heard from the chairman, since coming to this position at the number of cuts from O&M that we continue to see from all sides. At the end of the day, we're seeing these cuts to pay for lines and programs that do have a zip code. And in my view, that's unacceptable. Even as Congress adopted a $35 billion top-line increase to address in part record high inflation, we simultaneously tied your hands behind your backs. And this comes at a time when the threat landscape couldn't be more complex from what we're seeing with the CCP's rapid military buildup. I'm firmly convinced and just had a trip out to the Indo-PACOM region that if we continue to tread water within the next decade, the CCP will modernize its military, bring it to parity, and in some areas overmatch with our own. And when I talked to the Indo-PACOM commander, a key part of his strategy to deal with that is to have forces forward. That's a lot of O&M. And so I look forward to talking to you about that issue. Obviously, as we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine, it's a reminder that we have to sustain high levels of readiness. And I know we'll have many conversations today and going forward about how to strike that balance between readiness and modernization. Back to the Indo-Pacific, I do look forward to hearing about the progress the Army and the Marine Corps is making on the littoral regiments and the multi-domain task forces in the region. Over the past 2 years, this committee has paid particularly close attention to contested logistics. Again, as we're seeing in Ukraine, logistics wins or loses wars. And I remain concerned that the department's own plans for watercraft and logistics support vessels in the Pacific, as well as bulk fuel laydowns, are lacking. Neither appear close to ready to support and sustain inter and intra-theater operations. Another focus of the subcommittee has been on the industrial base. We've heard it and we'll continue to focus on it. The depots are frankly ancient. The recapitalization plans will continue to require significant investment. On the Navy side, when I spoke with Admiral Lesher, he and I spoke several months ago, he said that readiness was a second priority only for the Navy, only behind the Columbia-class submarine. Yet when we looked at the Navy's UPL list earlier this year, we found 5 of the top 10 unfunded priorities to be readiness related. And among those key readiness degraders were spares, repair parts, and organizational and depot level maintenance. So I know we all need to make those difficult trade-offs. I know we don't have an unlimited budget environment, but I do believe, as long as I'm honored to sit in this position on this committee, that it's time for all of us, the services and Congress, to put our money where our mouth is. We have to do better on these readiness accounts. And again, that is across the board. Again, I thank the witnesses. I'll yield, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. You are echoing or leading the same set of questions that are on my mind. Before we formally introduce our witnesses, I do want to recognize General Martin, who is retiring soon. And after 40 years of service to this country, extraordinary record. I do understand that you cut short a very important task back in Texas, something about moving into a new home and duties of family responsibilities. So thank you very much for being here. We recognize your service, and we very much appreciate your dedication to duty and to this committee. And I will send a formal, I'm so sorry to your wife. I understand these things very, very clearly. So with that, Mr. Walsh, would you like to add?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Martin, thank you for your service all these decades, but more importantly, thank you to your family. It's a team effort, and they're the ones that bear the sacrifices, whether it's deployments to overseas or deployments to Washington, D.C. I'm not sure which is worse, but yeah, I was reviewing your bio, and I too started out as an armor officer, so you made a great decision there to have a career as a tanker. A little disappointed you're not retiring in Florida. Everybody makes mistakes, but well earned, sir, and thank you.
Well, I think I said earlier that all politics are local, something about zip codes. Thank you so very much. Our witnesses today are extraordinary members of the armed forces who have a lifetime, well, almost 40 years for all of you of service. Really appreciate all of that. General Martin, we've talked already about your 40 years. Vice Admiral Critters, also Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, Capabilities and Resources of the United States Navy. General Smith, Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. General David Allvin, Vice Chief of Staff for the United States Air Force, and Lieutenant General David Thompson, Vice Chief of Space Operations. Gentlemen, thank you so very much. I was running through your resumes and bios earlier yesterday and again this morning, and all of you entered service at about within 2 years of each other in the mid-'80s. We thank you for that. We thank you for the educational institutions that prepared you for this service to our nations. So with that, let's start with General Martin, if you would like to make your statement.
Chairman and Ranking Member Waltz, thank you. And here's the good news. My wife's my #1 fan, and I can almost guarantee you she's listening to this if it's streaming right now. So those thanks and that apology will be well received, and thank you very much. But it's an honor to be here. Distinguished members of the subcommittee, thanks for this opportunity to discuss the readiness posture of the United States Army with you today. War in Ukraine rages on. The resolve of the Ukrainian people is humbling. They face threats that permeate all domains. It reminds me of the complexity of today's challenges, but also that nations, not just armies, go to war. There's much to be learned from our actions in Ukraine. First, the Army's ability to respond rapidly with military options to the Russia invasion of Ukraine is a full expression of our high state of readiness. This is a direct reflection of Congress's steadfast support. The success of the European Defense Initiative is undeniable. It enabled us to deploy over 12,000 additional soldiers to NATO's eastern flank within hours and days of Russia's invasion. We're also seeing the value of the United States Army building partner capacity through the State Partnership Program, foreign military sales, and years of training Ukrainian forces through the Joint Multinational Training Group, Ukraine. These successes are a model for what the United States Army can also provide for the Indo-Pacific, where land forces are still the center of gravity of the nation's militaries in that region. Not only is your Army ready to fight tonight to support allies and partners in that theater, but we're uniquely capable of building partner capacity there as well. The war in Ukraine confirms that the character of war is changing, but the nature of war has remained constant. Nations, not just armies, go to war, and we must acknowledge that winning is a result of ready forces, but also a ready society and a ready defense industry. Your Army recognizes the challenges on the horizon, particularly with accessions, retention, and realizing our modernization objectives. Thanks to your support, oversight, and direction, we've been working tirelessly to address these. Our people are critical to our readiness, but recruiting motivated, fit, and academically proficient men and women continues to be a challenge. Only 23% of military-age men and women in the United States are qualified to serve, and that does not even reflect propensity. We are pursuing every approach to recruit talent, including modifying our marketing strategy, providing bonuses, and considering soldier location preferences through our options programs. We're also working to address fitness and training needs within the recruiting pool. For instance, we've introduced a new program in basic training which acclimates recruits to a higher level of physical activity to reduce injuries while in basic training and beyond in their careers. The Army is also taking proactive measures to improve soldiers' working and living environments in order to prevent or reduce harmful behaviors. And we are working to improve the quality of life on our installations in order to retain soldiers, family members, and civilians. Finally, we're continuing to modernize our organic industrial base in order to ensure that we've effectively built the force of tomorrow. We're employing innovative new technologies like 3D printing to mitigate supply chain issues. We're also continuing along a 15-year phased approach facilitated by systems like Vulcan that can help us make informed investment decisions as we go along. At the same time, we're an all-volunteer force and a reflection of the society we serve. We are grateful for Congress' continued efforts to improve the whole of society mental and physical health, attract and retain talent, and improve the resiliency of our American defense industrial base. We are a ready and trained Army, but our readiness imperative to our mission is also fragile. Our Army must be both responsive to the threats today while still modernizing to be ready for the threats for tomorrow. We will continue to collaborate with academia, external agencies, sister services, and Congress to fulfill our mandate to be the most lethal ground force in the world. Thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to your questions.
General Martin, thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your testimony and the written testimony also. It covers many other subjects in greater detail. Vice Admiral Critters, if you would come forward with your testimony.
Ranking Member Garamendi, Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Waltz, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the readiness posture of your Navy. Today, the Department is delivering an adaptable, ready, and lethal Navy to the Joint Force at the front lines of strategic competition. Foundational to the combat credible power is strong execution and resourcing of the Navy's fourth generation process. Readiness remains the critical enabler to naval superiority, and while we've made progress in reducing maintenance delays, delivering high-end training, and improving manning in our ships and squadrons, we still have work to do. Personnel readiness is core to naval power, and we owe our sailors, our civilians, and their families a work environment and a community and a support structure where they are rewarded for their talent and treated fairly and valued for their sacrifices. Our budget funds construction and repair of child development centers. It increases child care fee assistance. It adds significant funding to unaccompanied housing sustainment as well as increased housing capacity overseas. Ensuring that our sailors have access to adequate mental health care is a top priority as we focus on building sufficient health care capacity and better foster a culture where it's okay to ask for help. We are comprehensively implementing both medical and non-medical mental health assistance aimed at improving mental health care, optimizing performance, promoting signature behaviors, as well as suicide prevention. We are increasing both virtual mental health access and the number of active duty mental health care providers assigned to our operational and training commands, and this is allowing more flexibility in connecting our sailors with providers. As the national demand for mental health care workers increases, we are pursuing innovative ways to recruit and retain the expertise needed to support the fleet. Shifting from personnel readiness to fleet readiness, we remain focused on ship and submarine and aviation maintenance improvements. We have reduced delays in our public and private shipyards, and we continue to improve using analytically driven insights. Additionally, we have prioritized investments in the shipyard infrastructure optimization program to bring our aging public yards back to needed standards necessary for the future fleet of our Navy. Aviation readiness remains strong. We are maintaining 80% or better mission-capable rates for our tactical aircraft, and we're showing improving trends in our other type model series. Expansion of the Fallon Range Training Complex is a top legislative priority. It's a critical enabler to support the Joint Force and improve combat readiness by allowing us to train how we will fight. Future readiness remains a focus as we balance requirements for recapitalization and modernization across the Navy portfolio. This is required to deliver the most capable Navy now and in the future within the allotted top line, and hard choices are required, and we look forward to working with Congress to ensure that the Navy is properly resourced. Finally, the United States requires a lethal, capable, and ready Navy to defend the homeland and provide an enduring maritime advantage. I look forward to working with the committee to ensure that the Navy is delivering the readiness required to answer the nation's call. Thank you.
Admiral, thank you very much. We now turn to the Marine Corps. General Smith.
Well, thank you, Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Waltz, and distinguished members of this committee. It's a privilege to get to appear before you today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. The Marine Corps remains your nation's crisis response force, the 911 force. We are ready to deter and defeat those adversaries that would challenge us. We provide a contribution to the naval and joint force that is very unique. Our identity as Marines centers on being ready to deter, fight, and win as individuals, as units, and as a corps. Everything we do is in support of warfighting advantage and being the most ready when our nation may be least ready. That's our obligation to the American people and to you. The Marine Corps is currently executing an extensive modernization campaign known as Force Design 2030 to best prepare us for the pacing threat posed by China. That Force Design 2030 ensures that the Marines who are operating forward, campaigning, can respond to crises, contribute to integrated deterrence, and conduct the day-to-day campaigns that are required with our allies and partners to deter and, if necessary, defeat an adversary. It makes us more ready today and will make us even more ready tomorrow. Change is very difficult. It's difficult culturally, fiscally, but it has to happen and happen now because the pace of our adversary is accelerating. We prioritize L-class shipping and the light amphibious warship, which are both vital to our ability to provide the combatant commander what is required to execute warfighting tasks. We prioritize our talent management, our people. How do we retain? We talk about recruiting, but how do we retain our way out of a difficult recruiting environment? And we also prioritize our training and education modernization so that those Marines have the best tools available to make them the most ready. And every dollar lost, to your point, Mr. Chairman, on O&M means that a Lance Corporal or a Lieutenant shoulders a greater share of the burden, and we should not and cannot allow that. And I would simply close by saying that your support and oversight of our readiness efforts enhances and preserves our lethality as the nation's crisis response force, and we are very grateful for that oversight. I look forward to your questions, and I would return the courtesy as Congresswoman Spear closes out also nearly 40 years. Ma'am, thank you for making us better. We have a saying that steel sharpens steel. So thank you for always asking us tough questions. It does make us better, and we salute you for that amount of service, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Having worked, thank you very much, General. Having worked for nearly 40 years with Congressman Spear, you're quite correct about the steel. We're going to go, let me get back on track here. Let's turn to the Air Force. General Allvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a blessing and a curse to follow Eric Schmidt because I would like to share the same sentiments, but I can't say it any better than Eric did. So, ma'am, thank you so much for what you do for all of us and have done for these many years. Chairman Garamendi and Ranking Member Waltz and distinguished committee members, on behalf of our Air Force Secretary and Chief of Staff, thank you for the opportunity to join you today to discuss the critically important topic of readiness. Let me begin by expressing our appreciation for this body's continued partnership and support in delivering the resources necessary for the Air Force to pursue transformational change. The pace of China's accelerating modernization, coupled with Russia's acts of naked aggression, are palpable reminders that the threats to our national security are very real and perhaps closer than we'd previously believed. Against the backdrop of this strategic environment, your Air Force is committed to delivering air power anytime, anywhere. It's our promise to the nation, to our joint force, our allies and partners. However, the only way to make good on that promise is to ensure our readiness today is adequately balanced with our readiness tomorrow. Readiness starts with our airmen, both in and out of uniform, who constitute our greatest strength and our competitive advantage. We must continue to attract and retain the best that America has to offer if we are to successfully take on the challenges ahead. To that end, the proposed budget increases funding by $27 million to expand our outreach to underrepresented groups, untapped geographic regions, and academic sources. Additionally, we're committing significant resources to maintaining and improving dormitories, child development centers, and housing. We're also making progress on our aircrew deficit, which remains a challenge. Continuing the positive trend from last year, we reduced our pilot shortage by 250 airmen, yet we still have over 1,600 pilot vacancies. To resolve this issue, we are using a combination of new training programs to generate the same or better quality pilots in less time. At the same time, we're leveraging numerous monetary and non-monetary initiatives to retain their valued experience. We're also modernizing our operational test and training infrastructure, which consists of both physical and synthetic environments to enable quality, threat-relevant training. We're upgrading our ranges to accommodate advanced fifth-generation platforms and capabilities. At the same time, we're investing in synthetic training tools that allow us to maintain readiness using robust, dependable, and cost-effective methods of virtually replicating high-end combat scenarios. To address our weapons system sustainment challenges, we are constantly pursuing improvements in reliability and maintainability through investment in emerging capabilities such as Condition-Based Maintenance Plus, advanced manufacturing, and robotics, amongst others. While the proposed budget increases weapons system sustainment funding by $1 billion, this will likely only maintain our current level of resourcing of 85% of the requirement due to sustainment challenges of older aircraft as well as inflation. To ensure our Air Force is building and sustaining readiness against the pacing challenge and communicating that to the Joint Force, we are implementing Air Force's Force Generation, or AFOR-GEN model. This model produces a predictable, repeatable cycle against which we can measure and build more comprehensive readiness, thus producing a force optimized to address the priorities in the National Defense Strategy. However, significant challenges remain. The increasing aggregate age of our platforms and systems is critically challenging our ability to provide adequate readiness today while transforming our Air Force to meet the increasingly complex and consequential threats ahead. The high cost to sustain and operate these systems, along with their decreased relevance, is making your Air Force less effective in accomplishing what the nation expects us to do. Additionally, we require stable funding and appropriations to effectively use the taxpayer dollars throughout the year to best build and sustain readiness. We have tough choices ahead, and we will continue to evaluate those choices in a manner that balances the readiness requirements of today with a mandate to provide a capable, relevant, and ready future Air Force. We know that all of this must be done within available resources, and we look forward to working with Congress as we chart this way ahead. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Waltz, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the Secretary of the Air Force and Chief of Space Operations, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As we examine the readiness of the Space Force to accomplish its missions, the driving factor is a relatively recent and dramatic shift from space as a comparatively benign military domain to one that is contested. As this committee well knows, the capabilities and benefits provided from space are vital to our way of life and critical to effective military operations in all other domains. Over the past 2 decades, our nation's space sector has made dramatic technological advancements that have profound impact on all facets of human endeavor, and strategic competitors have taken notice. They've made a concerted effort to offset our civil, commercial, and military advantages in space. In short, the permissive environment that benefited the United States for decades has changed forever. Russia and China continue to pursue increases in capability and show a willingness to threaten U.S., allied, and partner operations and assets in space. Their actions are not aimed at preserving peace and stability. Rather, they are rapidly developing and fielding space capabilities with aggressive military intention. The readiness of the Space Force must be measured against our ability to respond to these challenges, not today's operations. As it relates to the requirements of routine day-to-day operations, Space Force units are more than ready and able to accomplish their assigned missions. However, when measured against the ability to respond to an adversary in a contested domain, much work remains to be done. The training standards and equipment that served us well in the past are not sufficient to address the threats we expect to contend with now and in the future. To that end, the Space Force is actively redefining and redesigning our force readiness model and training standards to more effectively prepare Space Forces in support of the national defense and our assigned missions. Let me take a moment to describe some of those shifts. First, the key challenge for the Space Force crews that execute missions continuously in peacetime is finding extra time to conduct training that will be needed to conduct those missions in conflict. To address this, we've developed a new force generation model specifically tuned for employed-in-place forces executing 24/7, 365-day missions. This new model constructs force packages and introduces a rotational cycle that allows Guardians not only to execute their day-to-day responsibilities, but also preserves time to conduct much-needed advanced training and readiness activities. This model allows us to address the readiness requirements of each unique crew member, say a satellite operator, an intelligence specialist, or a cyber defender, providing them with dedicated time to improve their skills against the most challenging threats. It then brings them together as a crew to complete their readiness training and fully prepare before we commit them to operations for mission execution day to day. The second change in our training regimen is in the area of equipment. Today, Guardians train by and large on equipment designed for operations in that benign environment. The focus of this training is procedural proficiency for routine operations. There is much less thought given to the training of tactics necessary to counter hostile action. Our Guardians need different training objectives and tools for this contested domain. To meet these needs, the Space Force is actively pursuing a full spectrum operational test and training infrastructure. This infrastructure will be a system of systems designed to provide live and virtual training opportunities. It will include high-fidelity digital models and simulators to allow us to validate tactics, test system limitations, and create a synthetic training environment against the thinking adversary. The development and fielding of this infrastructure is one of the highest priorities of the Space Force. Without it, Guardians would not be able to have defendable systems, proven tactics, or the ability to practice their craft against an opposition force. The operational test and training infrastructure will be a force multiplier, allowing Guardians to maintain and improve our strategic advantage in space. Last but certainly not least, readiness in contested domain requires the Space Force to modernize our force structure. We must counter and defeat a thinking adversary who becomes more capable and dangerous every day. We must transition away from legacy systems to new force designs that complicate the adversary's decision calculus and likelihood of success. First and foremost, to deter conflict in space, but ultimately to win should an adversary choose to attack. The present fiscal year 2023 budget makes investments in exactly those areas. In conclusion, the Space Force will continue to prioritize readiness in all of its facets to effectively deter adversaries and, if necessary, prevail in conflict. Thank you for your steadfast support and partnership, and I look forward to discussing this further in today's hearing.
General Thompson, let me start with an apology. I was looking at my notes rather than the 4 stars on your shoulder. So we'll start with that. Thank you. Just noting the Space Force being new, I'm not sure we know how to measure the readiness in your operations. And we'll want to watch that in the months and years ahead so that we're, as you figure out how to define readiness, we'll want to watch that along the way. I'm going to start with my series of questions. I'm going to hold myself to 5 minutes, and we'll go from that. We're focusing, or at least I'm focusing, I think Mr. Walsh also, on O&M, probably because of the recent activities in the putting together our version, the House version of the NDAA, where O&M was the place where raids occurred. They're targeted for other priorities. We see this in budgets, we see this in reprogramming, and unfortunately, we see this in the Congress, most recently with the NDAA, when this account is often used to offset competing priorities. I believe part of the reason for this is because operations and maintenance accounts are opaque, and it's hard to understand the true impact of these cuts. Therefore, I'd like to know what these impacts are. I'd like to ask each one of you to quickly give us a real-world example, perhaps 1 or 2, of what the impacts are when maintenance accounts and operation accounts are cut. What does it mean? I'm going to start a little different order here. I'm going to start with the Marine Corps General Smith. If you can give us a couple of examples of what happens when O&M is cut.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. When operations and maintenance budgets are cut, you get one less flight hour for a new pilot. That pilot will eventually achieve 1,000 hours, but they'll achieve it a day or a week or a month later than they otherwise would have. That pilot, while ready, is less ready than he or she should be or could be. If O&M is cut, you may not be able to take the entire unit, a battalion, for example, to a major operation or major exercise, in the Philippines. So only half or a third of the unit gets the training that was offered to them at Balakatan or Cobra Gold. They are less ready than they otherwise would have been. They lack the experience that those O&M dollars would have brought them because spare parts didn't make the airplane ready or because the dollars for the fuel to provide that flight hour were not there.
Chairman, two examples. Number one, we talk about facility restoration dollars on the installations. If the budget's less, the order of merit list, those projects we thought were the most important to attack that year is affected, and so the project at the bottom will probably not be resolved until the next year, and so it's a rolling cachet of projects on each of our installations or some of our installations that are affected. And the second one, it answers your questions, but it's a nuance, and I'd like to mention it in this testimony. But when we execute an emergent requirement, something that's not in the Global Force Management and Allocation Plan, and something that's not planned, when we execute that, typically somehow we get compensated for it eventually, but not immediately. And so what happens is that impacts our ability to execute our programmed readiness activities because we've got to use the resources we have to cash roll that until we do get compensated. And so that's something that is very complicated as we execute during the course of the year. And as you well know, we don't have OCO anymore, and so it's pure base dollars for O&M. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think there was something that occurred this year in Europe that wasn't planned. A good example. Let's go to the Navy. What does it mean when O&M is cut?
Yes, sir. I agree with the previous comments and appreciate the question. I think when we look at our big readiness accounts like ship maintenance, the flying hour program, ship operations, that's one of the reasons why we established the OPN pilot, frankly, in our ship maintenance accounts for private sector surface ships. When those things are cut, there are fewer availabilities that we'll be able to afford in the year, and that has a cascading impact. Same thing that was previously mentioned on our shore side, where we fund our sustainment and restoration and modernization of our bases. If we don't have sufficient funds, that tends to bow wave and creates a problem for us. So very similar to what was previously stated. Thank you.
Air Force.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'd like to build upon what my Marine Corps colleague talked about. He talked about, with respect to aviation, the personnel readiness issue. I would like to couple that with actually the platform readiness is impacted as well. So, for example, as the O&M budgets are smaller, that means perhaps we aren't able to grow our maintainers as fast, or the ability to do the on-site maintenance and get ahead isn't there as well. So what that means is, with these aging aircraft, you spend more time in the depot. You have longer depot times. And when something kicks off, I'll think about our mobility platforms, C-17, C-5. When something like the Operation Allied Refuge with the Afghanistan issue pops up, we have to have those aircraft ready at all times. And so that backlog starts to build up, and you can't buy that time back with a fixed amount of depot infrastructure and an increasing requirement for depot maintenance, because some of that deferred maintenance has had to go into the depot. Your actual platform's degradation and readiness starts to wane, similar to where General Smith was talking about the air crew as well.
Thank you. Space Force.
Mr. Chairman, two quick examples. The first is advanced training activities for our Guardians. Certainly the needed proficiency training continues every single day, but those larger scale, more advanced training opportunities, we have to reduce the number, we have to reduce the level of sophistication, so not as much of our force gets that advanced training and to the sophistication we need them to have in order to face threats. And then the second is a growing backlog of maintenance sustainment activities, both on the ground-based command and control systems for for our satellites, but also the sensors and radars and other things that we have on the ground. That maintenance backlog grows, and the chances that we're going to have increased downtime and things grows as well.
A couple of thoughts, my thoughts on this. First of all, in all of you, when you submit your budgets, you submit the proposals, they do not call for 100% readiness across the line. You come in at 75% or 85%, some percentage. And so what you are submitting to us is insufficient in your own view to maintain readiness. And then it winds up with us. And we're sinners as much as you are on this matter. We'll take your 85% and we will whack it and dice it. And the result is it may be 80% of what you claim you need. And so I raise this issue for our own discipline as we go into the final drafting of the NDAA and the appropriation process, that the readiness accounts really are critically important. New platforms, equally important. The good news that I have next to me, I have the chairman of 2 subcommittees, and I'm sure they're listening. I know that we've talked about it amongst ourselves, and I'm sure Mr. Walsh has on his side with the ranking members. With that, I will yield to Mr. Walsh, and as we come back around, I'll have some more comments. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all of your calls ahead of time. General Martin, we talked about Guard and Reserve readiness, and particularly as it pertains to the looming decision on discharging potentially 60,000 Guardsmen and reservists over the vaccine mandate. And I fully understand, as a 26-year veteran myself, good order and discipline, and an order's an order. You order the platoon to charge the machine gun on the top of the hill, they got to follow it. But I also think it's incumbent on us as leaders to constantly evaluate the cost and the risks of our orders. And maybe charging that hill is going to be too costly to that unit. So I think my concern here is that the nature of and the effectiveness of the vaccine has evolved. It started with absolutely it stops the spread, and of course we can't have sailors getting into a submarine or airmen getting into a missile pod or getting in the back of a Bradley infecting each other. But I think it's pretty clear now that it doesn't stop the spread. It's more of a decision on what type of symptoms you want to incur or risk in your personal capacity, making it much more of a personal health decision. Here nor there, my understanding is the decision sits with the Secretary. We're talking about states potentially losing up to 20 to 30% of their Guardsmen and women, replacing them in a very difficult recruiting environment, much less getting them trained to the capability they once were. I don't know how you get there. So I understand it sits with the Secretary, but what's your contingency plan to replace those capabilities on that type of scale if the Secretary sticks with his decision and discharges 60,000 Guardsmen and reservists? What's the backup plan?
Congressman, thank you. She has not made a decision yet, as you well know. We talked about that yesterday. And so she's got to take a lot of things to take into consideration as we move towards that decision. But each and every day, we're making progress in terms of more soldiers choosing to vaccinate or their exemptions are approved. And so we're making progress on those numbers. And I think we need to see what happens over time. What's going to be the impact when the new Novavax, if I'm getting the name correct, vaccination comes into play, and how many people are going to change their mind as a result of that being available as an option, which we believe that'll be. And so we will have to manage our force, but we're talking about the future, and we haven't made that decision yet. She has not made those decisions yet.
No, I understand, General. I'm just asking you about you must have contingencies in place. If we suddenly discharged essentially 6 divisions worth of guardsmen and reservists, how then do we backfill that capability, and how long would it take you?
I'd like to take that for the record, Congressman.
Okay. And for the record, I've taken the vaccine. I think this isn't a political issue. I'm just talking about weighing that risk of a guaranteed loss versus relatively healthy men and women with a fraction of a percent that are getting seriously ill at this point. I'd like to just stick with you, General Martin. Mr. Chairman, do you think we're going to have to come around for another round? Can you just take a moment and talk about the Army's role in the Indo-Pacific, how critical it is in terms of our security, assistance partners, our allies, soldiers waking up in a foxhole next to an American soldier, how the majority of the chiefs of defense and our allies across the Pacific are actually Army officers. I think a lot of people would assume that they're Navy. And as we continue to shift in line with the National Defense Strategy, I think it's important to understand the Army's role in these exercises. And the carry-on there is you having the O&M dollars, you having the readiness to be able to carry them out and have those forces forward.
Thank you, Congressman. Land power matters anywhere in the world, and it is my assertion that in order to win in a complicated environment that's in the Pacific, it's going to require a complete joint force, and land power will be a part of that joint force. The Army provides a significant amount of capability in building partner capacity, as I talked about in Ukraine, and we're doing in the Pacific with security force assistance brigades. But it also has capabilities such as long-range precision fires that will be part of our multi-domain task forces. We have 2 that are dedicated to the Pacific right now. We have a logistics network that is reliant upon United States Army watercraft and land forces, port opening capabilities and other capabilities on the land to deliver capabilities so the joint force can be supplied. We have supreme command and control capability for joint forces. And of course, we have our traditional forces and air and missile defense capabilities that are there. One thing that we typically, we tend to, when we look at the map of the Pacific, we see a lot of blue and not a lot of green. But 16 of those 33 countries have CHODs who are land force raised commanders. Most of the militaries in those countries in that region are land forces, and if we build upon those partner capacities with the capabilities we have, we believe that we can have even a more credible deterrent and, if necessary, respond to crisis capability in the Pacific.
No, thank you, General. And just in closing, at least for this round, I think for both the Marine Corps and the Army's force design forward, those inter-theater and intra-theater lift capabilities are, from what I've seen and been briefed, wholly insufficient at this point to fully be able to execute the O plan. So I look forward to follow-on conversations. I know that's something that Sea Power, both the chairman and ranking member have taken a hard look at, and I know we have in this committee as well, and look forward to working with you to fill those gaps. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Walsh, thank you very much. I'm going to give the order the questions here. Courtney, Wilson, Spear, Scott, McLean. So if you're in there, Mr. Courtney, you're coming up, then Mr. Wilson, Ms. Spear, Scott, and McLean. Joe.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to all the witnesses for being here post-markup. Of course, this process is still not over. We kind of do NDAA like that video Schoolhouse Rock shows, that we actually have a real conference committee, so your testimony is very valuable. Admiral Kreitz, on page 3 of your written testimony, you described significant progress on the pace of surface ship maintenance repairs, which is terrific. However, there was no mention on the state of attack submarine maintenance, which, as you know, this subcommittee has been focused on for a decade. Based on the recently released quarterly submarine maintenance report, there are still significant numbers of attack submarines with over 3 months of maintenance delays, with some vessels still experiencing years of delays, including, of course, the USS Boise, which is kind of the poster child. of just how serious this problem is. It's been years. Given the urgent priority for more subs in regions like the Indo-Pacific, I think we all agree this has to change. I want to focus, however, on an issue which I believe is slowing down submarine maintenance as we speak, and that's the Navy's refusal to provide, quote, unusually hazardous risk indemnification for work in the private yards on attack submarines, specifically on the vertical launch system. The Navy's refusal is a change in 40 years of contract policy, which myself and others have been warning is going to create a barrier for work to be performed by private contractors. This barrier is now playing out in real time with repairs of the USS Hartford at Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut. The Navy has not met its June 1st deadline to have a third party on site at the yard to do the VLS work. That's not surprising since the market for comprehensive UHR insurance coverage is basically non-existent. And because of that reality, I want to emphasize this is not a USS Hartford unique one-off case. The Navy made a systemic change to UHR, and it's going to impact other repairs work contracts that had previously been fully indemnified and that are going to expire as time goes on. And I think it's blindingly obvious that the Navy is not going to find private contractors if they can't find insurance. And it's just a simple reality. I realize, Admiral, this is not sort of your portfolio to do the contracts, but it affects readiness. If we're going to have, in my opinion, self-imposed delays because of contract issues. In the NDAA that we just finished, Section 815 of the bill modified the indemnification authority, which basically took it out of the Secretary of the Navy and pushed it up to the Secretary of Defense, which, honestly, there's some of us who are, we're all very pro-Navy, and we're not, but it's a message that this issue really is just screaming out for a resolution. And I honestly believe there's a compromise here. We can have contractors get insurance, risk insurance, to the maximum that's available in the market, but that as was the case for 40 years, that the Navy will be there sort of as a backstop, kind of like TRIA, which is again a way to cover risk, high risk activity. And again, I'm really just sort of bringing this up to flag it for the department, which is that we're already seeing the delay that's happening with Hartford, and it's there's no contractor that's in place to do the vertical launch system, and you have to have that, right? I mean, if you're going to do a full maintenance availability. So I just wonder if you could just comment.
Yes, Congressman, thanks very much for the question. And let me just say that the submarine force that we have today is the greatest the world's ever seen. And I'm biased, but you can put that in the record. It is impressive, and we need to continue to get our submarines into maintenance, and we need to get them out of maintenance. We have made progress in the public sector, and we've increased our manpower by 40% of workers over the last 10 years. We're making improvements. We are going after data-driven specific efforts to understand where the challenges lie. It's in areas of new and growth work and the way we plan and making sure that we have the parts and pieces available early. With regard to the private sector, we need that capacity. We're close partners with Electric Boat as well as Newport News. I would just say that with regard to indemnification, you're right. I'm not a contracting expert here. I know that the Secretary of the Navy has been looking at this, and what I will do is I will take your comments back to the Secretary of the Navy, and we will come back to you.
I appreciate that. And, again, the door is always wide open in terms of continuing this effort. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Mr. Wilson, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman Garamendi. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity I had to be with you and Patty on the delegation that we visited in Romania for visiting with our Black Sea allies, Romania, Turkey, Bulgaria, Georgia, Ukraine, how important that was to see the security of the Black Sea region. Additionally, I had the opportunity to be with you at the at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in England. And then it was so meaningful to me to be with you as we went to Helsinki, Finland, and to Stockholm, Sweden, to welcome Finland and Sweden into NATO, how important that is. Also, Congressman Walz, ranking member, I was really grateful to be with you in Kyiv December last year. What a life-changing experience it was for me, and I appreciate your outspoken service on behalf of our country with your background, Green Beret. And then I'd like to tell General Martin, thank you for you and your family's 40 years of service to our country. And I also share your recognition of the resolve of the people of Ukraine for victory, which is just so important for the security of the American people, that the people of Ukraine are victorious. With that in mind, I appreciate the leadership of Brigadier General Patrick Michaelis of the U.S. Army Training Center at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Fort Jackson is the Army's training center of choice for basic combat training and an installation consistently recognized for excellence, where 60,000 troops received initial entry training before entering the ready force. Given our increasing challenges with recruitment, what are the initial entry training centers doing to improve the physical readiness while minimizing injuries to the increasingly sedentary pool of recruits?
Congressman, thank you, and it's great seeing you again, and appreciate your words. So about a year ago, the Training and Doctrine Command started a program where we embedded medics and behavioral health specialists at the battalion level in each of our training battalions. And the results are undeniable. In that year, we had 1,700 fewer trainees that were removed from basic training last year compared to 2020. So we're going to continue to resource this program and continue to grow it, because any attrition you have in the training pipeline is attrition that you won't receive in the operational units or elsewhere in the Army. And so it's really important that we continue to work at this. And Paul Funk in Training and Doctrine Command and Pat Michaelis are leading that effort with that initiative.
Thank you very much. And I do want to echo Ranking Member Walz, too. I am concerned about removing our troops, and that every effort should be made to provide for exemptions so that we can maintain the service members that we have. With General Smith, I'm really grateful that I previously represented Parris Island. In fact, my son is a Navy doctor there at Beaufort Naval Hospital, and so I have a great appreciation of Marine service. And with that in mind, I'm also grateful to be the Congressional Military Youth Programs Caucus Chairman, and part of that is the Young Marines Program. And I want you to know that I was really grateful the NDAA includes funding for this and authorizes DoD funding, and how meaningful this can be for recruitment and also opportunities for young people to serve. With that in mind, what is the status of of Marine Corps recruiting, and wouldn't it be helpful to have the Young Marines be part of this?
Congressman, good to see you, sir. We appreciate the support for any program that offers to the American people the true value proposition of service. Young Marines is one of those examples. Rather than call it a recruiting tool, I view it as offering to everyone a genuine glimpse at what the value proposition of service is. Our recruiting challenges this year across the board are in fact difficult, which is why we're so focused on retention rather than recruiting. But we will be we will make or come very close to making our recruiting mission in 22. It will come to a degree at the expense of the pool that we have ready for 23. Anytime you have less time in the delayed entry program, you will have a higher attrition rate at recruit training, which is unacceptable. So again, I think the focus for us is retention, and then ensuring that the American people see the value proposition of service in the United States Marine Corps and the United States military writ large.
And thank you all for your service. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. We now turn to Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your service. And I don't want to disappoint you, so I have a series of questions to ask. Let's start with you, General Martin. We just got word on the Military Personnel Subcommittee that you're going to have an end strength shortfall that is pretty dramatic, that you're now shifting from an end strength of 473 to somewhere between 445,000 and 452. So a reduction of between 21,000 and 28,000. That's alarming. Tell us how you're going to address it.
Congresswoman, thank you for your question. First, I'd like to say that it's 445 to 452, but we're going to mission ourselves for 455 if we can achieve it. And the question is whether or not we can achieve it, because right now what we're experiencing, the why of what we think is going on right now, is we've got unprecedented challenges with both a post-COVID-19 environment and labor market, but also competition, private competition with private companies that have changed their incentives over time. You've seen that with the various incentives that companies have provided. And then what we call as a result of that, a decreasing propensity and requisite qualifications to serve. That's why we've gone from 29 to 23% of the population that is available to serve, and that's not even propensed. And so that projection for 23 is correct. We believe that we'll land at 466.4 this year for an end strength if we make our recruiting objectives. And of course, that will impact, if we're over or under, that will impact next year's end strength as well. We're taking that all into account.
Okay, General Martin, I'm going to have to move on, but I think that, Mr. Chairman, we might need to have a subsequent hearing on this because it's pretty serious. And if we need to make some changes to be able to attract more talent, then we need to look more carefully at that. Let me move on to you, Vice Admiral Kreitz. 2 questions for you. The Air Force and the Army have instituted a policy that requires leave to be presumptively approved for women who are seeking a medical procedure such as an abortion or other reproductive health. They're not required to tell their commanders the specific reason for their needed leave. I'm not sure what the Navy's policy is. Can you enlighten us? Do you have presumptive leave? I guess the question is.
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. That is determined between the health provider and the member. So the health provider will determine the amount of leave required as the result of miscarriage, for example.
No, but my question is, are you presumptively going to provide leave and not ask any questions as the Army and the Air Force are doing? I mean, I'd love to see some consistency on this policy.
Let me, I believe that today the policy that we have is that that decision is managed at the healthcare provider. So the answer, I believe, is no, but let me come back to you with the details of why and the logic, if you will, please.
All right. The Army and Air Force also have established a policy of between 1 week and 6 weeks of convalescent leave following a miscarriage, depending on the circumstances. Would you please report back to us on what the Navy's policy? If we don't have something consistent across the services, we are making a huge mistake. So I would ask you to do that. The GAO reported that the typical service warfare officer gets less than 5 hours of sleep at night. I want to know what you're doing to enforce the Navy's fatigue management policy.
Absolutely. Thanks again. That was a 2020 GAO report that was done. There have been a number of efforts that are underway. We currently have a revised policy and watch standing for our surface warfare officers, and for all folks assigned to the ships are required to get 7.5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. We're also working Watch Bill software, which will allow us to better understand in real time as we work the details of who's on watch, how many, if people are being impacted. There are a number of different efforts that are underway, including trying to lighten up some of the mission sets that the ships are required to do at sea, increasing the number of training opportunities that are in port. So this is definitely a focus area. And
so are they getting 7.5 hours of sleep?
Yes, ma'am.
And you're auditing that?
Yes, ma'am, including yes, ma'am.
All right. I have another question on the suicides at USS George Washington. I'll wait for the second round.